In a storm-tossed tent, Cleopatra's gaze ignites desire, and a Roman officer finds himself powerless before her flame. The desert roared with fury, its winds lashing against a fragile tent pitched on shifting sand. Cleopatra, queen yet prisoner of nature's rage, stood tall inside. A Roman officer, hardened by campaigns, tightened the ropes, his armor clinking. Both realized the night would force them into uneasy proximity. Sand rattled like arrows against the canvas walls, while silence thickened between them, heavier than the storm outside. The officer dropped his cloak around her shoulders, not out of gallantry, but survival. Cleopatra accepted it, her gaze sharp, testing him. Outside, the desert howled like a lion, but within the tent, only their breaths mattered. They stood on opposite sides, two rulers of different worlds, stripped of armies, stripped of ceremony, left only as man and woman beneath a trembling canopy. "We are nameless here," Cleopatra said, her voice soft but commanding. "No queen, no soldier, only souls weathering the night." The Romans studied her, caught between discipline and desire. She was not just Egypt's monarch. She was flame in flesh, testing his resolve. The storm outside seemed to answer her words, shaking the tent as if to strip titles away. Her eyes carried the desert itself, endless horizons, shifting dunes, peril and promise alike. He felt the pull of that gaze, as though drawn into a mirage. Cleopatra leaned forward, her bracelets catching the lamplight, each movement deliberate. The officer's chest tightened. He had faced Gaulish spears and Germanic axes, but never eyes that could unmake a man's resolve with silence. The tent quivered with every thunderous gust, yet the quiet between them felt louder. Their breaths mingled, hers scented with wine and lotus, his edged with steel and leather. For a heartbeat, he wondered if the gods had conspired to cage them together, to test whether politics or passion would win. She tilted her head, her lips parting as though to speak, but instead she let silence seduce. "Do you fear me?" Cleopatra asked, tone half curious, half challenging. "I fear nothing," the officer replied, though his voice betrayed hesitation. "Good," she whispered, "then you may survive the night." Her words were dagger and caress both. He realized this was more than storm shelter. It was trial, seduction, and diplomacy woven into one. She was gauging whether he was pawn or equal. Her laughter rose low and rich, drowning the storm's howl for a moment. She touched the brazier flame, letting sparks leap as though the fire itself obeyed her. "Egypt survives storms because it burns hotter," she said. He felt both mocked and mesmerized. She was no caged monarch. She was Isis incarnate, testing whether Rome's soldier could withstand a goddess's heat. The tent no longer felt like canvas, but like a shrine. Each torch was a sacred flame, each cushion an altar. Cleopatra moved through it as priestess, her every step deliberate. The officer, though a foreigner, bowed his head instinctively. Something in her presence blurred the lines between woman and divinity, politics and worship. The storm outside became the drumbeat of ritual. Her hand brushed his as she passed. It was light as a whisper, yet it set fire in his veins. He gripped his knee tightly, battling discipline, but her touch lingered like a command he could not disobey. She did not apologize, nor explain. The silence after that touch was more dangerous than the storm. "You Romans think conquest means taking," Cleopatra said, "but true conquest is being remembered." Her words unsettled him. He thought of Rome's legions carving maps, yet here, in a fragile tent, He realized a queen could conquer without armies. She leaned closer, lips almost brushing his ear. "Will you remember me?" she whispered. Cleopatra poured wine into 2 golden goblets, her movements deliberate, each ripple of her gown flowing like water. She handed one to the Roman officer, her eyes locked on his as though daring him to drink. He lifted it, lips brushing the same rim hers had touched. The air grew heavier, filled with unspoken oaths, the storm outside muted by the thunder within. The officer's hand brushed hers as he accepted the goblet. Neither pulled away. Sparks seemed to leap from bronze to gold, soldier to queen. Cleopatra smiled faintly, knowing the storm outside had less power than what was kindling between them. The Roman felt the desert closing in, not as an enemy, but as witness to something larger than conquest. "You think Rome conquers all," Cleopatra said, her tone playful yet edged. "But Rome has never conquered the Nile. Nor me." The officer smirked, though unease glimmered in his eyes. She was no supplicant ruler. She was the Nile itself, dangerous, fertile, eternal. Her words struck deeper than blades, cutting into the pride of Rome. Lightning ripped across the desert sky, spilling through cracks in the tent, momentarily painting Cleopatra in divine light. Her jewelry shimmered as though the gods themselves crowned her. The Roman officer stared, struck not by fear, but awe. In that flash, she was no mortal woman, but a figure carved for eternity. "Do you believe in fate?" Cleopatra asked, her voice low. The officer hesitated, caught between soldier's logic and the pull of her question. She leaned close, her breath warm on his cheek. "The storm brought you here. Do you think it was accident or destiny?" He swallowed hard, unable to answer. Cleopatra removed her serpent diadem and set it gently on a cushion. "Here I am not a queen," she said softly. For a moment, her vulnerability shimmered brighter than her jewels. The officer watched, stunned. Without the crown, she seemed even more powerful, for her strength was not in gold but in presence. The officer loosened his armor, unbuckling straps that had weighed on him like chains. Breastplate and sword were set aside. For the first time, he stood before her, not as soldier, but as man. Cleopatra's eyes softened, approving. The storm outside wailed, but inside, 2 defenses had fallen. They sat facing each other, crown and sword both cast aside. 2 worlds that had collided now balanced precariously in silence. Cleopatra reached for a fig, offering it to him. He accepted, tasting Egypt in the sweetness, tasting her. A faint smile curved her lips, the storm beating like a drum for their unspoken pact. Neither spoke, but the silence itself became a vow. His gaze lingered on her bracelets shaped like coiled serpents, her fingers jeweled with power. She studied his scarred hands, built for war, but trembling now. The tent trembled with the storm, yet what passed between them was steadier, stronger than nature's rage. Cleopatra leaned back, her gown shifting like flowing water, and said, "Tonight, we are not enemies." Her words rang with double meaning, political and personal. The Roman officer nodded slowly. A queen and a soldier, bound by storm, had chosen truce. Whether it would end at dawn, neither dared ask. The storm outside shifted from fury to rhythm, like a drumbeat echoing through the sands. Cleopatra swayed slightly, her body moving with the cadence, as though the desert itself played for her. The Roman officer watched, entranced. In that dim tent, with torchlight flickering, she seemed less like queen or mortal and more like a vision born of flame and dust. He spoke suddenly, surprising himself. "I was sent to measure Egypt's strength." His voice was low, almost ashamed. Cleopatra smiled faintly. "And what did you find?" she asked. He paused, eyes locked on hers. "Something Rome has never measured." The silence afterward was heavier than stone, yet filled with possibility. Cleopatra leaned forward, resting her chin lightly on her jeweled hand. "You Romans see war as numbers and maps, but Egypt plays longer games of time, of bloodlines, of memory." Her words were silk and steel both. The officer realized he was no longer interrogating a queen. He was being taught by one. A moment stretched long. Her eyes dropped briefly to his lips, then back to his eyes. He felt heat rise within him, heavier than armor. Cleopatra shifted closer, not touching, but the space between them throbbed with energy. The storm beyond seemed to press them together, forcing choice. Cleopatra reached out, not for his hand, but for his goblet, taking it lightly from his grip. She drank slowly, her lips leaving the faintest trace on gold. Returning it, she held his gaze, her gesture deliberate, an unspoken test of submission and trust. He accepted it, drinking from where she had touched. The tent creaked, its poles bending under the storm, but neither looked away. Cleopatra set her hand lightly on his shoulder, her golden bracelets glimmering. The Roman stiffened, then exhaled. That single touch unraveled the discipline of legions. She leaned closer, her perfume rich with lotus and myrrh, drowning him. For an instant, they seemed to mirror the desert itself. She, the blazing fire of the Nile. He, the shifting sand of empire. Together, they created a force stronger than the storm. Cleopatra whispered, "You see now, soldier, to touch Egypt is to burn." His breath faltered. He knew she was not wrong. Their faces lingered inches apart. The officer thought of Rome's Senate halls, cold and calculated, and then of this tent, alive with heat, scent, and storm. Which world held more power? He could not tell. Cleopatra studied him as though reading the battle inside his mind, her faint smile betraying that she already knew. A violent gust rocked the tent, scattering scrolls and cushions. Cleopatra did not flinch. Instead, she rose gracefully, adjusting her golden girdle, as if the storm itself bowed to her composure. The Roman officer stood as well, his posture stiff with awe. "Egypt does not bend," she said. "Remember that." Cleopatra extended her hand, palm open, bracelets gleaming. "Sit with me, not as soldier, but as man," she said. The officer hesitated only a moment before taking her hand. The touch sealed something deeper than treaty or truce, an acknowledgement of power shared, not taken. The storm outside raged on, but inside peace began. Cleopatra guided him to sit beside the brazier. The flames cast them in a halo of gold and crimson. She spoke softly, "Every empire burns. The Nile teaches us to flow, not to fight the fire." The officer studied her, realizing she spoke not only of Egypt, but of herself. She reached for a papyrus scroll that had fallen, brushing dust from its ink. "Words outlast armies," she said, rolling it carefully. He saw her tenderness for knowledge, her reverence for legacy. For the first time, he wondered if Rome's power was truly eternal, or if Egypt's memory would outlive it. He confessed, "Rome fears what it cannot own." Cleopatra tilted her head, amused. And what is it Rome cannot own? He hesitated before answering. You. The storm pounded louder, as though echoing the admission. She smiled faintly, the answer she had been waiting for. Cleopatra leaned closer, the brazier's fire casting light across her cheek. Her necklace of turquoise and gold glowed like starlight. She whispered, "Then you already know why Rome will never defeat Egypt." Their faces hovered, close but not yet touching, suspended on the edge of surrender. A sudden gust tore through the tent, extinguishing one torch. Darkness pressed in, broken only by firelight from the brazier. Cleopatra did not move back. Instead, she let her hand rest lightly on his, the silence around them deeper than thunder. Neither spoke. The storm outside thrashed, but inside stillness reigned. Cleopatra's breath touched his lips. His heart pounded like war drums, yet he did not retreat. In that silence, Rome bent, not to armies, but to her presence at Pishtan. At last, Cleopatra leaned back slightly, her smile serene. "Even storms obey me," she said. The officer exhaled sharply, as though released from a spell. He realized she had not merely tested him, she had conquered him. "You came seeking Egypt's weakness," she said, her tone sharpening. "Now you know its strength." He bowed his head both in respect and defeat, yet within that defeat was longing, not humiliation. Egypt had taken him, and he did not wish to be free. Cleopatra lifted her goblet once more. "Drink, soldier. Tonight, you belong not to Rome, but to Egypt." He accepted, drinking deeply. Their eyes met over the rim, sealing a pact unspoken but undeniable. At last, the distance between them collapsed. Cleopatra's lips brushed his, light as fire's first spark. The storm howled outside, but inside the tent, the kiss silenced everything. Power and surrender met in one shared flame. The officer pulled back slightly, his breath ragged. "If Rome knew," he began, but Cleopatra pressed a finger to his lips. "Rome is far away. Egypt is here." Her words silenced every doubt, every tether to duty. She drew him into her arms, not as prisoner, but as equal. Their shadows merged against the tent wall, framed by flickering flame. The storm outside softened, as though bowing to their union. Whispering against his ear, Cleopatra said, "This night will outlive empires." Her words struck him deeper than sword or spear. For the first time, he longed not for victory, but for remembrance. He placed his hand over hers, scarred fingers gripping her golden bracelets. "Then I am yours tonight," he said, his voice steady at last. Cleopatra smiled, victory complete, yet tinged with warmth. Together they reclined on the silken cushions, the brazier's flames their altar. The storm outside became their chant, the tent their temple. Every movement, every breath felt like ritual, sealing a bond beyond politics. As night deepened, the storm began to wane. Cleopatra rested her head lightly against his shoulder. The officer, once hardened, now sat softened by her nearness. Neither spoke, for words had already been surpassed. At dawn, silence reigned. The storm had passed, leaving the desert still. Cleopatra rose, her gown shimmering with dew-like sheen, crown once more upon her brow. She looked every inch a queen reborn. The Roman officer remained seated on the silken cushions, torn between duty and desire. His face held both awe and turmoil. He knew his war was no longer with Egypt, but within himself, between Rome and Cleopatra. Cleopatra turned back, eyes gleaming with triumph. "Rome may take lands, soldier," she said, "but tonight it was I who conquered." Her words cut and caressed all at once. The officer bowed his head, smiling despite the weight inside him. She stepped out into the calm desert, crowned by sunrise, leaving him behind within silken shadows. The storm had passed, but its memory remained, carved into both their souls. For him, it was not defeat, but remembrance of a queen who commanded storms and hearts alike.